I think one of the strangest psychological effects of modern life is that people increasingly experience time as competition. Not time in the natural sense, not weather, not seasons, not the gradual aging of the body, but social time, visible time, measured time. People now seem to carry an internal awareness of where they are supposed to be by certain ages, as though adulthood comes with invisible milestones everyone else has secretly memorized. By 30, one should have become something. By 40, one should have established into it. By 50, one should probably not still be beginning again. And yet, human lives rarely unfold with that kind of narrative discipline. I became aware of this very intensely when I entered cinema. My first serious artistic work happened on stage through theatre and dance productions that traveled internationally for years. That was the world I understood completely. Rehearsals, writing, music, performance, long conversations after shows, airports at impossible hours, performers carrying emotional residue from characters long after stepping off stage. At that time, it felt like a complete artistic life. I never experienced those years as preparation for something else. They were simply life. Then, much later, after 50, I made my first short film. 50. It is an age at which society expects fluency from you, not beginnings. And almost immediately, something psychologically peculiar happened. My previous life stopped feeling like experience. It began feeling like delay. I remember standing on a film set surrounded by people much younger than me, who seemed entirely at ease inside the language of cinema. They understood lenses instinctively, editing rhythms, technical shorthand, the movement of a set. They had grown up inside visual culture in a way I had not. And I remember becoming acutely aware of my age in a way I had not experienced before. Not because anybody made me feel unwelcome, they didn't. That feeling came entirely from within. I remember one particular afternoon during a shoot when an assistant director, who was probably younger than some of my old stage productions, was explaining scheduling logistics to me with enormous patience. And I suddenly had the strange sensation of existing in two timelines simultaneously. In one version of reality, I was an experienced writer-director with years of artistic work behind me. In another, I was a beginner, trying to understand why everybody seemed to know instinctively where to stand and what to do, while I still felt mentally half a second behind the rhythm of the set. I think beginning again later in life creates a very specific kind of psychological disorientation. Because when one is young, inexperience feels temporary. At 50, inexperience becomes existential. You begin wondering whether you have arrived after the important conversations have already taken place. And perhaps that is partly why modern culture worships youth so intensely. Youth represents possibility before consequence has fully accumulated. A young filmmaker still exists largely as potential. A young novelist still appears infinitely expandable. We romanticize early brilliance because it reassures us that life unfolds cleanly and efficiently, that talent announces itself quickly, that meaningful lives can be recognized early. But older beginners disturb that narrative slightly. They suggest that life may remain unfinished much longer than people find comfortable. I think many adults carry an unspoken panic that they are becoming historically irrelevant while still alive. Not irrelevant to the people who love them, but culturally irrelevant, professionally irrelevant, artistically irrelevant. And social media intensifies this fear constantly because Everybody now encounters the edited momentum of other lives continuously. Someone younger publishes a novel. Someone else directs a film. Someone wins an award. Someone buys a house. Someone appears to reinvent themselves elegantly online every 6 months. And after enough exposure to the visible acceleration of others, your own life can begin feeling motionless, even while it is actually unfolding. I sometimes think comparison has become so psychologically exhausting because it no longer merely evaluates the present, it rearranges the past. Once you begin feeling behind, earlier years suddenly start appearing wasted. Experiences that once felt meaningful begin looking like detours. Previous work begins looking provisional. Entire periods of life become difficult to defend internally. That, I think, is the cruelest aspect of comparison. Not that it diminishes achievement, but that it alters memory itself. I remember experiencing this very personally when I entered cinema. Years spent writing for stage productions suddenly began feeling strangely illegible inside the new hierarchy of filmmaking. Nobody explicitly dismisses your previous life, but internally, you begin doing it to yourself. You begin thinking, perhaps I should have started earlier. Perhaps I spent too long elsewhere. Perhaps I misunderstood my own life. And I think this happens to many people beyond art. Someone changes careers at 45 and suddenly feels absurd sitting in classrooms with younger colleagues. Someone goes through divorce and feels emotionally left behind while everybody else appears settled into stable adulthood. Someone becomes a parent later than expected and quietly feels they entered the experience after everybody else had already formed invisible communities around it. Modern life constantly creates the sensation that one has missed the correct train, despite the fact that human beings were never designed to develop identically. I think literature understood this long before modern psychology did. Reading Stoner by John Williams affected me deeply for this reason. The novel is almost radically uninterested in conventional success. It observes a man whose inner life remains serious and attentive despite outward ordinariness. And what affected me about the book was not simply its sadness, but its understanding that meaningful lives often appear unimpressive externally while they're actually being lived. Modern culture struggles with this idea because everything now must accelerate visibly. Growth must become content. Achievement must become public. Identity itself must become legible immediately. But many important human transformations occur invisibly for long periods before they become externally recognizable. A sensibility develops slowly, taste develops slowly, a way of seeing develops slowly. Looking back now, I realize the stage was not separate from cinema at all. For years, I had watched performers rehearse emotions repeatedly until they stopped looking performed and began looking psychologically real. I had watched how hierarchy develops inside artistic spaces, how admiration changes behavior, how repetition alters people gradually over time. I had spent years thinking about pacing, tension, entrances, exits, emotional rhythm, the atmosphere of rooms, the strange vulnerability performers carry after stepping off stage. At the time, none of this felt cinematic. Only later did I understand that those years had altered the way I observed faces, waiting, discomfort, power, and the things people avoided saying directly. But while living through those years, I experienced no sense of preparation, only duration. And perhaps that is another reason people panic about time. Preparation rarely feels meaningful when it is occurring. Only retrospectively does life acquire narrative coherence. While one is actually living, It mostly feels fragmented, repetitive, uncertain, occasionally absurd. I sometimes wonder whether the phrase falling behind even makes philosophical sense. Behind whom exactly? Behind what? Human beings speak as though there exists a universally agreed structure for a meaningful life, but history suggests otherwise. Toni Morrison published The Bluest Eye at 39 after years spent editing, teaching, raising children, carrying sentences privately before the world understood what she was becoming. Frank McCourt published Angela's Ashes in his 60s. Raymond Chandler arrived at fiction after another life entirely, and perhaps that is precisely why his writing carries the exhaustion and moral ambiguity that it does. I do not think age automatically improves art. Obviously, it doesn't. But I think experience complicates perception. And complication, artistically speaking, is often more interesting than confidence. When I made my first short film after 50, I lacked the technical ease of younger filmmakers. That was undeniable. But I also noticed something else. I was less interested in impressing cinema, more interested in understanding people. Perhaps beginning later changes ambition itself. Or perhaps, after enough life, one becomes less seduced by visibility and more interested in attention. Not attention from audiences, but attention towards existence itself, towards gesture, towards contradiction, towards the strange ways people conceal themselves from one another. I don't know whether one fully escapes the fear of falling behind. Perhaps it is inseparable from being conscious of time itself. But I do think some anxieties become less persuasive once one realizes that meaningful lives rarely move according to culturally approved rhythms. And perhaps beginning late is not always evidence of delay. Sometimes it is evidence that your life insisted on taking the longer road into itself. This has been Notes After Rain.